So we're going to focus on key messages, and that is trying to figure out how do you now go out and share the information you need to share. And if you're a staff person, and actually I have to tell you, I'm this way. I get genuinely excited about the level of detail. When I learn about how something works, I think everyone else is as excited about it as I am. And typically, I go home and I share it with my husband. Yeah. Talk about a reality lesson. And he's like, okay, is there a short story? Is there a reason this matters to me? And that's what your audience is going to be saying. So when you talk about what your key messages are going to be, I want you to think about the 3 most important things you want people to know. How many of you are finance or budget directors? Raise your hand. Okay, good number of people in the crowd. Can you whittle your budget down to 3 things? That's a tough issue. And again, sometimes it depends upon who the audience is, because the audience may impact how you change that message. But I think, and you're going to see this afternoon, you have to stop and go through the effort to consciously think about it. Now, why do we say 3 things? Cavello, that I mentioned, is one of the persons who's done the work to say the attention span is not really long enough to remember more than 3 things. Any of you all have teenagers at home? Can you tell them more than 3 things? It's hard to remember past the first one, right? That we're all like that. And one of the things Cavello talks about is primacy and recency, meaning the first thing you say is going to be remembered more, and the last thing you say. So when we're talking about those 3 things, if there's one that's a little bit, has some kind of tinges of negativity, I'm going to put that in the middle. I'm going to make the 3rd thing something that makes you feel good when you're leaving the conversation, and the first thing is going to help frame what we're talking about. So when you have key messages, they're the important things you want people to know. They have to be concise, clear, and simple. The word succinct. Now, if you're talking to budget directors, usually they're pretty succinct. If you're talking to communications people, we tend to be a little verbose. So trying to narrow that down to say, these are the messages we want you to hear. And you're trying with that, with delivering these messages, to manage the emotion. You're trying to touch on it and ask about why we care. So if I'm going to go out and talk about my budget message, perhaps the first thing I want you to know is we're facing some really difficult choices and we need your help. That's short, it's concise, and it's saying we need your help. You're part of this mix. If we pick up on the message about we can't do it all, maybe that second message is that our taxes, our sales tax and our property tax continue to decline, which means we're going to have to make changes in the services we provide if we're not going to raise taxes. Now, I said not going to raise taxes. What did you hear? She really wants to raise taxes. So we either have to have more money to pay for these, or we're going to have to change the services we provide. And then your 3rd point, one of the things that I think is really important if you're a community leader, people expect you to be positive. They don't want to have you stand up and be a complaining, sniveling, this government is awful, things are terrible, the economy sucks. I mean, none of those things make you feel good about your community leaders, whether you're the finance director or the city manager or the mayor. So when you stand up, give me some optimism. Our goal is to work together with this community to continue to be a place that you want to live and work. Come back with a message that gives me some hope and some confidence of what you're trying to convey. When people are upset, and people are sometimes upset at budget public hearings, they say that they lose 80% of their ability to process information. So when the guy called Scott's wife complaining about the dirty water, there was nothing she could do to break through until she said, "Come use my shower," and it took away that emotion. Instead of being angry at the wife of the bureaucrat, she's now opening up her home to me, and it changed my whole perspective of how I looked at it. So trying to figure out, when people are mad, there's no benefit to trying to preach your message until you let them know you care and you break that down. So when we talk about key messages, Cavello actually has done some studies, went back and looked at how do people communicate effectively. He looked at the average quote that's in a newspaper, counted the number of words, and the average quote is 27 words. That's really not very many words. He did this about 7 or 8 years ago, so now it's probably down to 15 words as everything is shortened up. 9 seconds was the average time of a sound bite. That's what you're going to have on television. You have 9 seconds to convey your message. Boy, trying to be clear and concise is really hard in 9 seconds. And he found that good professional speakers grouped things in messages of 3. So if you have to have more than 3 key messages, you may say, I have these 3 and I have these 3. But they're going to only really hear your first 3 messages. So what I want to do really quickly, we're going to do this as a group. And Scott's going to help me hand these out. This is just a little preview of what we've got coming up this afternoon. If you will take these and pass them around to your group. This is 6 little facts about a city. And I want you guys to look over them, and then we're going to just talk about what message would you try to convey if this was your city. Number 6 is we've created new jobs. Now, I put in 28.4. If you're a numbers person, what's 28.4 new jobs? Let's be careful about numbers. If I see a number that has, if you're going to talk about 13 million, say 13 million. Don't give me 13,746962, because I just lost it. I didn't hear that number. So put it in terms people understand. I would say we've created nearly 30 new jobs in the community, because I'm going to hear that and I'm going to resonate. And why do people care about jobs right now?
Because they don't have one.
Because they don't have one. So everything you've done to create new jobs is important. And the other part of that sentence I thought that was helpful is because you've helped local businesses expand. There's a sense that a lot of times in government, all we try to do is find that great big company to come in, and the local business people say, what have you done for me lately? What are you doing to help me expand? I think that's a great point. So if that's going to be your key message, one of the things you want to say is, this city and this council are focused on creating jobs, and we're excited that we have 30 new jobs in this community because 3 of our local businesses have been able to expand with incentive money that we've provided. Okay, that's a pretty positive note because everybody cares about jobs. Okay, what do you not want to talk about on this list?
Number 5.
Okay.
It will have a very positive impact on them and not a really direct impact on them.
You would or would not talk about 5? Okay, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. There are some people, and again, I think of who the audience is going to be. If I'm talking to a group of retirees, I might talk about what we've done with number 5.
Which is to reduce positions by almost 5%.
Which is reducing positions by 5%. I'm not sure that I want to talk about, I would not say, and let me tell you, we've laid off 17 city employees, because that sounds pretty heartless. What I would tell you is, in the same way you've had to tighten your belt, we've had to tighten ours. And that's meant having to reduce the number of employees. It's meant changing some of the programs because we know these are tough times. So I think you can say it, but I wouldn't say it this way. I've eliminated 17 jobs. Well, I thought you were you created 28, so you kind of have a net of not so good here. So again, how you're presenting it, and if you get attacked on that, so you've eliminated 17 jobs, do you think that's a good thing? No, it has been one of the toughest things I've ever been through. We hate to have to deal with these situations. But fortunately, because we knew it was coming, we left some positions vacant. We were able to assist people, and of those 17, 16 of those folks are still with the city in different positions, and we've retrained them. Okay. I mean, have an answer. Don't make one up if it's not true, but have an answer. Sometimes we've had to let people go, but we have continued to provide certain help and assistance to them. So be ready for that. How about the cell phones? You got a commissioner. We actually have somebody run. Stay away from number 4.
Number 4 is about 3 commissioners who are up for re-election. One of whom is accusing the city of being spendthrifts and wants to eliminate elected officials' perks like city cell phones.
Right.
Vehicle.
We're not going to eliminate cell phones in the city, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I agree with you. I wouldn't even talk about it. If somebody wants to bring it up, then tell us what you're doing. In Tallahassee, I can tell you, we've talked about tightening the belt. we've looked back and said, can we eliminate some of those things that aren't absolutely necessary for the job? So yes, we've eliminated 10% of our cell phones, but some of them are necessary to do the work we do to provide services. So we take that
I
seriously.
think cell phones were a bigger issue with not everyone having them.
I agree. Good point. How many of you have commissioners where the city's provided them with iPads? A few. You had any grief from that yet?
Yeah, we're loving it.
Okay. I love it from the internal standpoint because we now have eliminated all of our hard copies of agenda items, and we gave the commissioners iPads, and we can show you how they're paying for themselves because we've eliminated all this paper. But the perception of the commissioners with iPads is sometimes negative. So again, it doesn't mean you don't do it, it just means you're prepared to respond, because if someone says, and you give them all that technology, those fancy iPads, in a year and a half, we were able to recoup the cost of the iPads because of the amount of paper we're no longer using to produce the agenda. Okay, that, for most people that will eliminate the conversation, but you have to think about those things. Okay, anything else on here you think that's important? What are your key messages? Yes, ma'am.
Number 2, that if you come out and you anticipate, we're going to listen and care.
Thank you. And the way you said that was perfect.
Number 2 on this list, I'm doing this because
Please.
it's involved in that. Number 2 on this list is about public meetings where citizens have said they wanted a community garden, for example, you're talking about the town Haskell show. And in fact, that was in the community garden, so the response to citizens was.
And what they hear is, I listened to what you did and I implemented that and we're being responsive. Okay, one I want to touch on is number 3. Again, talking about leaking sewer and water lines, not very sexy. Do you mention that? Do you say we've got some problems where we have leaking infrastructure? Again, bad word, infrastructure. We have leaking lines and we need to be looking at how we're going to replace that. Do you ignore it or do you talk about it? You talk about it. I think you do. And even if you're not, and how do we usually pay for water sewer lines? We increase the rates. I think there's a benefit to planting that seed early on. So if you know that's coming up, even if this year we're not going to raise rates, there's a benefit to saying, we have some long-term concerns too, because the water lines and the sewer lines that we have under the city streets that none of us ever see, they're 60 years old. And 60-year-old pipes leak, and that means we're losing money and we're impacting the environment. So we're going to be working with you over the next year. How do we address that? So you plant the seed that we have a problem that we're trying to get to that you don't see. If we're ever talking about water and the need for water lines, if you say, it's hard to sell sewer lines because nobody really wants to think about sewage, but when you talk about, we believe everybody in this community has the right to have clean, fresh water delivered from the city. I mean, it's like, I have a right to get that. See how we're shaping that message with how we talk about it, as opposed to saying, we need to improve the infrastructure in your neighborhood. Improve the infrastructure? What does that mean? We want to be sure that you continue to get clean, fresh water delivered right to your home. It's a different way of describing the same things we deal with every day, but internally we talk about it as infrastructure. And one of the things I tell you, this is the hardest message, and we don't do this well at the city either. If you say, well, I'm just going to talk about that internally this way, but when I talk to my customers, I'm going to use simple language. It doesn't work. You have to change the way you're talking all the time, because when you get asked a question, you can't always stop and think about how to reshape it. So if you're talking like that internally, I'm really proud of our city manager, because we talk about key messages. When a department comes and says, yeah, we're looking at changing the transit system, and here's why it's needed. At the end of the meeting, the city manager says, what are your 3 key messages? She asked the department that question. And you know, if you're a department director, you better have already thought of that. How am I going to convey this to the public? What will the headline be in the newspaper tomorrow when you roll this out? How will people react to it? You should be planning and thinking of that ahead of time.
Michelle, I'm going to jump in just for a second, if I may. The general principle that I'm realizing as we keep talking about this issue, like infrastructure, water and sewer, there's a general principle about persuasive communication that those on the inside often think of the features. We're going to replace 20 miles of sewage pipe or whatever, or we're going to reduce leakage by X%, a feature of what we're going to do. The way you framed the water was all about benefit. Every citizen has a right to clean, fresh water delivered to their home. That's the benefit. Nobody outside the organization, and most people in the organization, don't care. Nobody cares about the sewer pipes themselves. We care about the benefit, or in the case of failing systems, the cost to me, what happens to me, not necessarily dollars and cents, but busted pipes that break roads and create congestion and problems, sewer leakages that contaminate our lakes and rivers. What is the effect on the people, not the feature, not the thing we're doing, but what effect it will have? So think about benefits and, in some cases, preventing harm rather than what we're actually doing to do that.
And Scott's right on target. That's what we do internally. If we're going to talk about paving, we talk about how many lane miles and the paving, the evaluation we've done, and how many are at this level and how many are at that level. And people don't really follow that. So if you have, go back to pictures. If you're going to talk about paving quality, show me a picture of a D road versus a B road. We use A, B, C, D, and when we evaluate pavement, I don't know what that means, so show me and say, this is not okay, this is where we're trying to get. So trying to figure out how do we convey this in a way that people say, I understand that that has meaning to me. Okay, when you're making your presentation, just some general tips. 75% of how you communicate comes from your nonverbal communication. 75%. So the stuff we've told you today, you're like retaining 25% of it. Now, Scott, give him your example of what you're supposed to do when you leave the session today. I thought that was a great tip of what you retain.
Oh, right. There's research that suggests, obviously I'm a university professor, so I'm worried about my students all the time. Research that suggests that if you review your notes from a lecture that you've heard within 5 hours, you will retain something on the order of 60 to 70% of the content. If you don't review it within 5 hours, you'll probably retain less than 20. Wow. So you think about the investment of your time today in this morning session, which is where most of the content's being delivered, then you're going to apply it. If you walk away from here and at the end of the day you put the notes on your desk or in your drawer, and next week you pull it out for some reason, 10 to 20% of what you heard is going to stick. If you make the time to look over it tonight, just spend 20 minutes, or 15, flipping through your notes, you double, triple, quadruple what you retain. It's just a good investment of your time.
So bore your spouse tonight. Go home and talk about what you learned at the session today. So, that really resonated with me when he said that, because how many of us go to, 2 or 3 day trainings and then a week later you're trying to remember what was important. So there's a lot of things about how do you make your message more memorable. When we stand up here, one of the things we talk about is don't hide behind the podium. When I'm here, what message does that send? What's that? Excellent. I've separated. You are there and I'm here. We talked about the Bill Clinton example when he comes out and talks to somebody. When I'm over here and I'm wandering around, and I have to do this because my eyes aren't so great, I have to go, oh, and Cindy, first it makes you wake up because you're like, oh my God, what if she calls my name, right? But it engages you in the conversation. I use my hands when I talk. I can't help it. So even if you told me to lock my hands down, I couldn't do it. That's how we talk. People say ums and ers. You know what? It's okay to do that. You'll hear us doing that. We'll say, well, you want to watch yourself, because if you do it all the time, I got to remember this is being taped. I've seen some commissioners who sometimes do that so much that it's almost annoying, right? Where they do it. And so you do want to, when we talk about practice, part of it is seeing what you do so you pick up the things you could do better. But an occasional and er, be yourself, get out from in front of the podium. Never, ever, ever get interviewed sitting behind your desk, even if you're the mayor. Why is that? Why do you think that's the case? It's the same thing. It creates a barrier. And if they already think you're the fat cat bureaucrat and you're behind that mahogany desk, what message do they get? It reinforces it, yes.
So why are City Hall chambers set up that way?
I agree with you.
Precisely to maintain that power strength.
It's a power elite.
It's up on the dais.
Yep. If you look in most chambers, and we call this, we're trying to tell you that we're in power. We're up high. We look down on you. When you come to speak, you can't speak from your seat. You must get up and come and address us. You may not address the audience, you address us. We arrange the chambers, and I think every government in the nation practically does it that way. When I was in Colorado working in a job, a city was building a new chambers, and they set it so that the commission were down and the audience sat up. And they consciously did that to say, we work for you. So yeah, it's interesting the way that rooms can be set up to convey a message, and you have to kind of stop and think about that. Sometimes we kind of want that power at commission meetings where it's like, we speak and you listen, but that's not the participatory government we're trying to get. So think about how you're doing your nonverbal communication. Appearance, think about who you're talking to. When we were talking to a group that was at Lake Butler, they said if you came to Lake Butler to talk to a commissioner and they looked like him, you'd vote them out, because they have farmers, they have people that are, you know, are workers, and they don't expect their government leaders to be sitting there in a suit. Now, when Scott and I come to talk to you guys today, why do you think we wore a suit?
You're the experts.
Because I want you to think I'm the expert.
This actually happened to me in Lake Mary. Who's from Lake Mary?
Was Lake Mary, you're right.
Someone's here from Lake Mary. I don't remember who, right? Anyway, I was at a conference in Lake Mary. This is a long time ago, and I was doing a presentation. It was one of the first I'd done for municipal governments, and I came in dressed slacks and a polo shirt, and I looked a lot younger then too. And this woman came up to me after the presentation and said, "You know, when you walked in, I didn't expect much, but that was a really good presentation." Do you hear what happened? Because I was wearing I'm a conference presenter, but I wore a polo shirt and dress slacks, and you know, relatively young-looking guy at the time. It's like, oh, don't expect much from this guy. Now, if I'd come in a nice suit and tie, had my red tie, power tie on, she would have expected great things from me. You know, it's bizarre, but you have to know the audience and know what they're looking for. It's not your style. Oops, I just died. There we go. It's not your style. It's their culture that matters.
We were at a meeting one time talking about utility rates, and the first question from the audience was, the lady stood up and said to our person over utilities, "It's fine for you to stand up there in alligator shoes and tell me that I need to be reducing my amount of electricity." She didn't hear anything more than his shoes. And his first thought was, well, they're not alligator, they're, you know, some synthetic. Okay, that's not the point. How he was dressed conveyed a message. He didn't care. Yeah.
I've noticed that on the media quite often, if a presidential candidate is going through a factory or anything, the first thing they do is they roll up their sleeves as if they were actually
factory workers.
Governor Romney, as if
right.
he wants to, you know, relate to the working person.
His comment, when you see the president walking, or his presidential candidates, they roll up their shirt sleeves. There's times when it's okay to do that, because, and again, you have to be careful. It has to be real. So if you will never wear a t-shirt to anything, don't do it to a public meeting. You have to be comfortable with who you are. Because part of it is, whether you're a government person or whatever, you have to be real, but you have to think about how they're going to react to you. And saying, yeah, every now and then, if I'm going to be out at budget meetings, you know what, if you take the police chief someplace, I want the police chief in a uniform. Because there's something about the chief in a uniform that says, I'm here to protect you, that makes me feel good. There's just a message that comes from uniforms. Now, if you're trying to have people work with you on a problem, maybe the chief ought to be in a polo shirt. But if he's trying to talk about confidence in the department, think about it. So the point is, it does matter. Give it some thought. Your voice, again, you got to be positive. Nobody wants an elected or appointed or staff person to not be positive about their community. So focus on it. Even in tough choices, be positive. Be confident but non-threatening. Okay, quickly, we talked about questions. They can all be anticipated. You know your subject matter. So know what they're going to ask you. If you're going to go talk to a group of seniors that are on limited incomes, what are they going to talk to you about? If you go to talk to the neighborhood group that's been up in arms about trying to get restrooms in the parks, be prepared. If you don't know, then call the head of the neighborhood association and say, what are your friends talking about? What are the issues they care about? Come prepared. You know this situation best. Sit around with your team and brainstorm ideas. Again, you're the city manager. I think people expect you to know it all. You really don't know it all. So ask your staff, hey, come to staff meeting on Monday, but talk to the folks out in the field and ask them, what are they hearing back about issues that I may not be hearing, you may not be hearing? Try to get some information coming in so that you're prepared. And then something most of us never do, write them down. Why write them down? Because it forces you to focus. It forces you to think of, now what am I going to say? How am I going to prepare it? Now, I sometimes will even write down my responses or put keywords I want to remember. When you get up to talk to the group, please don't read them. You know the subject matter, but I write those. I do this, Scott's going to say, really, Michelle, how many times have you done this presentation and you still have notes? Yeah, I still come back and look at them because I make a note to myself, oh yeah, remember to tell that story. Remember to put that in. But don't read it because nobody will listen to you reading. But you have to actually prepare, you have to write it down. Okay, bridging. How many times have you been someplace where no matter what you say, somebody wants to take it back to an issue? Well, you need to be the one that takes it back to the issue. If you've decided your key message is about creating jobs in the community, you're going to have a businessman say, well, I don't have any new jobs and I'm not in the CRA and I don't have the benefit of that incentive you just talked about. So what I want to say is, well, I'd like to find out more of what I can do to help you in your business because this commission has said jobs are important. And the 28 jobs we've created in the CRA, we want to find ways to expand that out to other communities. Take what their issue is, bridge it back to your message. If you ever do media interviews, and some of you in this market may have reporters that are a little more aggressive, but lots of times reporters, when they ask you a question, they can ask you a question and you don't even answer the question. They can say, why are you continuing to eliminate city employees who are tax-paying citizens by doing these continual cutbacks? And you come back and say, we're trying to tighten our belt the way everyone else is. But let me tell you, over the last year we've created 30 new jobs by helping local businesses expand. So you didn't really answer the question, you just bridged back to your message. Now, really good reporters, take 60 Minutes reporters, are going to say, yes, but what I asked you was, what about those 17 city employees? Most people and most reporters hear your new message about 30 new jobs and say, well, where were those created? Well, let me tell you, Bill's print shop and whatever it is you're going to tell them. Most of the time you don't have to, and I don't say that again to be disingenuous, you're not trying to ignore specifically what they said. You acknowledge it, you address it, but you're trying to get them to understand and hear your message about we're focused on creating jobs. So think about how you bridge back to your message. Instead of telling me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. Why haven't you done this? Well, what I can tell you is we're focused on this. So instead of saying, I don't know why you can't live within your means, why do you have to talk about possibly raising taxes? And you say, what I can do is listen to the feedback from those of you in this room. And if you say you'd rather see services changed than pay more in taxes, I need to hear that feedback. Let me tell you, I can do this as this person. So what can you do, not what you can't do? You also, when I touched on this, you want to tie it back to your message. Whatever's asked, you want to tie back to your message and keep the discussion focused. I know everybody's had that occasion where there's one person with an issue that they just won't let go of. It doesn't matter what you say, they're going to say, but why don't you have a no-kill shelter? No matter what it is you talk about, what about a no-kill shelter? Do you care about pets? Do you care about animals? Why not a no-kill shelter? And it doesn't matter the conversation. Again, I think you have to be respectful. You have to acknowledge that and say, that's an important priority, and we've talked about that, and we've got to face that with all these other tough issues as well. And you know what, Wanda, I know that you care a lot about that. If I can connect with you after the meeting, our animal shelter supervisor is here, and let me have her talk with you because you may have some experiences and ideas you've seen from Austin of how you could do it better, and we'd like to get that input. If there's a way to diffuse that to a later conversation, there's a benefit of doing that. Now, our Wanda is still going to say, okay, but you just need to commit to a no-kill shelter. I'm going to follow up with you on that. Okay. You all have them, right? Those people that will not let it go. Can you guarantee? Okay, this is a nice little trick. Joy, you've said you're not going to raise taxes this year, but can you guarantee you're never going to do it?
No.
No. You know what? I can't, I don't want to be in a position that I'm saying I can't guarantee, because again, that's kind of a negative. So go back to what we were talking about. Avoid saying you can guarantee, because the truth is you can't guarantee we're never going to raise taxes. We don't know what the situation will be for years to come. You can't say there are no guarantees, because that's not a very positive message. So what are you going to say? Okay, the favorite is, can you guarantee? And they say, no comment.
Read my lips.
Read my lips. That's a good one. You can't say those things. No comment usually means I know, I'm just not willing to tell you. So none of those are going to be a positive response. When you're asked to guarantee, bridge back to what you know. What I can tell you is this city commission has said, with the economy the way it is, we're not raising taxes. In the future, we'll look at what the needs are of the community, and then we'll balance the needs then. Don't guarantee, don't say I can ever guarantee, don't say I won't guarantee. Bridge back to your message. Again, if you're prepared for that, because you know they're going to ask you that, right? Have your answer prepared, maybe write it down. What I can guarantee you is, as an elected official, I'm going to continue to do the best job I can to balance the needs of people in this community. That's a guarantee I can make. As a city employee, what I can guarantee is I'm going to work to try to make sure we continue to have this dialogue with people who care about this community, so we're doing what people care about. Come back and guarantee me something that you can guarantee. We already talked about don't repeat the negative. It is really easy to do that, and reporters in particular love to do this, but citizens have gotten kind of wise to this too. When they say, and you're going to get this experience this afternoon because I get to help play the role of a nasty, negative reporter. And when they say negative questions, clearly you don't care about people because you have cut the police department and you're willing to sacrifice our public safety by turning the services of our police department over to the county and to the sheriff. So you don't care about public safety. And you say, it's not true that I don't care about public safety. What have I heard? I don't care about public safety. Tell me what you do care about. You know what? I care about safety, and that's important. That's why we've talked to the sheriff about how do we increase the patrols. And can we provide you with the same level of service at a lower cost if we were to bring these services together? And that's what we're exploring. Tell me what you can do, not what you can't. Don't repeat that negative language. Don't use their language. Use the opposite. And let me give you a few examples in a minute of opposites, and we're going to bridge back to it. When someone says, you're a lazy bureaucrat, you say, I'm a committed public servant. I am committed to this community. That's a different message. You're reshaping how they're looking at those words. You're a liar. And that's a pretty harsh thing to say. It's really hard not to react negatively. When you're really trying to be positive about your government and a citizen stands up and says, you're a liar, that's tough. That's hard not to have any reaction to that and say, you have the right to make your own statements, but what I would tell you is I am committed to being an honest, ethical person, and I care about this community. I'm going to continue to care about this community. Turn it around. Tell me what you are. You're misleading, I'm a straight shooter. You're cold-hearted, you're caring. You're negligent. That's a really harsh word. You're negligent in your responsibilities, and you say, I have a responsibility to make sure that we are fair and equitable to all people. I'm going to remain committed to that. You have to kind of think through how you respond to those negative slams. Reporters and again citizens, like, that's fine what you're talking about, but what if we have another tropical storm Debbie? And what if we receive 15 inches of rain in an hour? What are you going to do then? Okay, the answer is float away. Okay, we can't build systems to address 15 inches of rain in an hour. But again, you have to be responsive to that. So instead of coming back and saying, what if, worst case, come back and tell me, What we are doing is we're trying to build a system of stormwater and flood retention that addresses the major problems to help protect your house and your property and the lives of our citizens within the resources we have. Again, shape that message in terms of how you come back. Tell them what you know, tell them what you know now. When they're talking about the budget, I can't predict the future, but I know this budget's been designed with a long-term approach to keep our city financially strong, because that's important to our taxpayers. Tell me why. When you don't know the answer, one of the things that you'll see us do sometimes too, somebody asks a question, have you ever seen it where the person responding goes off on a totally different tangent than what the person asked? Maybe you didn't hear it, or sometimes we're thinking so quickly of the answer that we don't pay attention to the question. So it does help to say, Andrea, you were asking about how we're going to continue to provide those services? And she'll say, well, yes. How are you going to continue to do that? Ask a question when you're in front of an audience to make sure you heard it correctly, instead of spending 15 minutes explaining something. And you watch her body language when you're doing it, and she's like, I've done that, and you say, I'm sorry, I may be on the wrong track. Let me make sure. What was your question? It's okay to ask them again. Go back and reinforce it so you can get back on track. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. I wish I could answer, but I don't have that information right now, but let me get back to you. Can you give me your email address, and I will follow up today and get that information for you. Be responsive, and then do what you say. Explain why you can't answer now, give them a time frame, and follow up. Bridge back to what you do know when you don't know. This is, I think, one of the most important things I want you to think about, and really, Scott laid the groundwork with this when you started. This quote is really from Will Rogers, who said, when people are stressed and upset, they want to know that you care before that they care what you know. So when there's a disaster in your town, when there's a flooding, when there's a shooting, when there's something that goes wrong, people's reaction is normally going to be thinking of themselves. What if that was my house that flooded? What if that was my family member that was shot? Vincent Cavello went and looked at Mayor Giuliani right after the 9/11 incident. And his quote mirrored this whole idea of conviction, compassion, and optimism. Because he said, the depth of this tragedy is so extreme that we can barely deal with it. But from this event, the people of New York City and this country will rise together to create a better America. So he talked about how serious it was, but he left you with this idea of conviction and compassion and optimism for the future. They tell me, and not that Mayor Giuliani and I are close, that he already had that statement prepared. Not for 9/11, but for whatever incident happened. He already kind of had written out, if we have a terrorism incident, this is the statement that I'm going to use. Now, I don't really know that that's true, so I probably shouldn't repeat that, right? But that's my understanding. And Vincent Cavello works with the city of New York to help them prepare and be ready for whatever the next terrorism incident is, and they were prepared then. You can't anticipate and be prepared, but I got to know that you care. Show empathy, not sympathy. It's really easy. Again, I relate back to my teenagers. Mom, I don't have a car and everybody else does. Yeah, I'm sorry, but you need to get busy on this. I'm not sorry at all. I'm happy you don't have a car. I don't have to worry about that. Empathy says, wow, that's the Bill Clinton. You know what? I can't imagine how tough it is to be a mom that's unemployed right now. And here's what here's what I'm trying to do to reduce the likelihood of that happening. So show that you care. People, and again, why are we in this business? We're not here to get rich, because you're probably not getting rich in city government. We're here because we think we can make a difference. So let's drive that home. Use value-based words. We talked already about equity, fair, and be optimistic. And then practice, practice, practice. You need to have someone you share your message with. And it's ideal to pick someone who doesn't care. If a city manager talks to her executive team and says, here's my message, what do you think? Great! Good job! Be sure you mention the utilities. What about infrastructure? Okay, that's not the group. Find somebody who doesn't care. I say pick the teenager, pick your husband, pick the neighbor. It's worthwhile. I have a neighbor that I describe as Joe Bag of Donuts. He only cares about certain issues. So if I go over and talk to Rick, I can say, hey, what do you think about this with the city? That's ridiculous, you know, and I'll say, well, here's what we're trying to do. It's a reality check for me, because that's probably half of the people that we're going to be talking to are Joe Bag of Donuts. It's the average person in the community that says, what have you done for me? Have your messages prepared, write them down. The last thing is easier said than done. How many of you have ever been interviewed? Raise your hand. Okay, good share of the group. Did you go back and watch the interview? You have to do it. There are all kinds of things that we do that we don't think about. I squint when I also have the worst poker face. I'm glad I'm not facing most of you, because if Scott says something that I think is really ridiculous, I can't keep a poker face. In city commission meetings, I have learned to put my head down, because the city manager is looking out at staff, and so are the commissioners, and when the commissioner says something and you're like, what? You can't have that showing. I just have to look down. And she knows if I'm looking down, it's because I'm just like, oh my gosh, that is so wrong. I need to, you know, your reaction, how you react to things. If you watch yourself being interviewed, one of the things that sometimes pick on the men, I guess women can do it too, but men usually have change in their pockets, and when they're nervous, they jingle the keys or they jingle the change. Look at how you move around. I mean, the worst thing is being interviewed and having somebody who just can't stand still. When I do an interview, if I'm going to sit down and do an interview, I'm going to pick on the chair right here for a second. There's a whole message that's sent. If I'm doing an interview and I'm sitting like this, didn't I just tell you what I think about the issue? If I'm doing an interview and I'm sitting up here and I'm saying, we are so excited about the budget this year because we've actually been able to keep the services the same without increasing taxes, and we're excited about that. Isn't that a whole different message? And if you think you're so good at doing this, and we get that way, we do it so much, we do it so often, that we think we're pretty good at this, I don't need to prepare. You need to stop and say, yeah, maybe I need to think about, where am I sitting? If I'm going to get interviewed, this is the most beautiful setting. I'm going to be behind a green tree, because we're all about the environment in Tallahassee. So I'm going to go stand outside in front of City Hall, unless it's today, because it's probably about 99 degrees in the shade. If you're sweating, okay, that makes you look like you're nervous. So if you're going to be sweating, go stand behind a tree inside, right? Think of what's behind you. Think of how you're conveying the message. Practice and see what the reporter sees. Last thing, try not to be behind the podium. We're going to pick on you with that a little bit today, in terms of thinking about what barriers you're putting between there. Anticipate, plan, and practice. 3 things I want you to think about when you're presenting your message. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, because I think no matter what we do in government, sometimes we still reach the point that we think, why try? Why do we try? Because it's so hard to get people engaged in what we're doing. Teddy Roosevelt said, far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even through checkered failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat. You got to jump in there. You got to try it. You got to get excited about budget. Yes, budget can be exciting. And sometimes you're going to crash and burn. You just know it's going to happen. We're going to learn from that and come back and do it again. So now you guys get the best of the treats. We are going to have the next speaker be a city manager that gets to share her worst budget story ever.
I'm Pam Brancasio. Lynn Tifton asked me to do this from Florida League of Cities. The idea is to have a city manager actually share with you, I think, a horror story. I've been doing budgets and city and county governments for almost 30 years now, and I actually started out as a budget analyst. So I appreciate when everyone is still in the budget and finance office tries to do. I'm not giving you my absolute horror story. My absolute horror story, we had a citizen die of a heart attack after he had finished pounding the pavement in the dais. Stepped back, killed over, hit his head and died. I am not giving you that story because there's no positive message there. Probably only for fire, who proceeded to work over him for about 30 minutes even though they knew he was already dead because they were asking for additional firefighters. So I'm not giving you that story. That's probably the worst ever. That's the only public hearing I've ever had anyone die at. Scott, have you ever had that?
No.
Has anybody else had that? No. Oh my God. West Palm Beach, it happened, honest to God. What I'm going to give you is a positive message and hopefully some tools that you can take and use. And you guys have been terrific, by the way. Thank you. It's been great. We're in the city of New Smyrna Beach. We're about 23,000 people. We're on the Atlantic Ocean, about 10 miles south of Daytona Beach. We're a wealthy community, we confess. We have the second lowest millage of 16 cities, but at the same time, we were hit by the real estate crunch like everyone else. I arrived in July of 2009, so I've been there for about 3 years. I had not prepared that particular budget, and as a city manager, that's tough. You arrive the week the budget's going out, but when you get to September on the public hearings, you of course have to know everything in that budget and present it as your budget. Not kidding you, this was my first public hearing in New Smyrna Beach. We had a fire marshal standing at the door with the clicker as people would come in to make sure we did not exceed the fire codes. Any of you guys had that in 09? Anybody had that the last 2 years?
Been meeting for a fire for a year and a half.
Okay, so you don't have this at your budget meetings? I had not seen it in a number of years either. But being a wealthy community, it's also a very conservative community. We had a Tea Party group. 2 years prior, they had come in mass, so we're talking 07-ish, right before everybody got the crash, and literally, they had asked the City Commission to drop the millage 0.3. I think the millage was around 3.4 and they dropped to about 3.1. No one looked at the impact. It happened at the public hearings. The staff, the objections I'm sure that were made were overridden, and the city literally increased its spending without looking at the long-term impact. And the budget that had been prepared, this would have been FY 09-10, I had been there 3 months, used $968,000 to balance for recurring expenditures. Well, our general fund is about 19 million now, Thea. So you can see that's pretty substantial. That's 10%. It was recurring expenditures. There's no other way to get around it. They had responded politically 2 years prior. It was the same commission, by the way, in 09. Had not looked at the long-term impact, and it was not a good time to come in as a new city manager. My message, this cannot continue. We can work together as a community. We've got to define our priorities, and we have to create a fiscally sustainable budget. This is what happened in New Smyrna. It wasn't as bad probably as some of your communities, but our total taxable value fell 34% between 07, and we also included 2013 for you. Mind you, we've got our budget hearing to set the proposed millage this coming Tuesday night, which again, that's why the session has been so great. We all have our own individual messages to sell this next week. Our general fund, and you can see, had gone from 11.9 to the budget that Thea and I've just prepared. And these are the taxes. Now, this is not the total general fund. We're now down to about 8.1. So 32% drop. What were our strategies? That was in September with the angry mob. And there were also 2 candidates there who came into office in November of 09. So new manager, 2 new city commissioners coming into this. First thing we did was put together a 5-year forecast. It had not been done. Perhaps if they had had that in 07, they wouldn't have done the radical drop in millage. We presented that in January. Very public splash, lots of media, lots of interviews, lots of interest. We utilized forecast, very conservative forecast. We were looking at maybe a 10% decrease the following year, 10% decreases is taxable value, and a 0 even in terms of FY13, which is the current year. Huge deficits, mega deficits. We use 3 different millage rates, current rate, rollback, of course, which we all know was roll up, and a tax rate required basically to fund the projected expenditures. We were very conservative on the expenditures. We did not overstate, basically. We went out, city manager and finance director, who I need to introduce, by the way. Stand up, Thea. Thea Philord, who, by the way, has won the GFOA Distinguished Budget Award for the last 2 years, so you can see we're on the other side now. We met, and she was not the finance director, by the way, in 07, 08, or 09. I should mention that too. We met with all the city employees at various times on different shifts. So we went out to fire. We have 4 fire stations. We went out to police. We met with every shift. We presented the same information. Very, very important. You cannot change your numbers when you're out there talking to your employees. But everyone, from the guy driving the trucks, need to know why you can't fund increases and why you can't buy new equipment. We reviewed the whys. They're all reading it and seeing it, even if they watch Fox News. They know the real estate values are down. They know gas prices were up. They know they're not getting the interest that they once were on their savings account and their deferred comp accounts. It's all around them. They've heard about the impact of the global economy. You just have to bring it home again, locally in terms of the message. We also talked about tax reform. Remember the additional exemptions that had just been approved? Remember the 3% cap, the disparity in the tax roll? Your employees do understand that. They're taxpayers. So again, you're bringing the message home. We also established an employee budget task force. Any work process improvements, we had not started lean teams at that point, but we did start with a task force. We asked everybody to submit suggestions and recommendations, and I did throw this in. We had a few lay off Charlie comments. Well, if we laid off Scott, we could save money. He doesn't do anything. But we also had some very thoughtful comments. Things like, instead of setting up a huge portable stage, buy a permanent stage for special events. Things like that. So there were some folks that took it very thoughtfully. We also started negotiations. We have 3 unions, police, fire, and our general employees. Strategies within the community. We started a budget task force. And I've got to tell you, you as staff and your city manager and your commission has to be willing to let go a little bit. And that's very hard, for all of us, particularly budget and finance and managers. We had 5 members on the committee, 1 from each of our city commissioners. A couple of them were budget virgins in that they had really not been that involved, but they were respected within those districts and the community. A couple of them had been very vocal critics. I wouldn't say card-carrying members of the Tea Party, but successful business people who had always sort of criticized the city's budget. Well, the worst critic became the chairman. It was perfect. It was perfect. What we did was basically give scenarios, and you probably have all done this, that you were going to need in terms of reductions to balance the budget based on your projections. So no new science there. But the difference was that the department directors, with my sitting there, and Thea's finance director by then, presented that information at the budget task force meeting. Great media coverage, every meeting. These are the cuts that we're going to have to make in police. These are the cuts that we're going to make in fire. Here's the fire master plan. Here are the stations that might have to be closed. I mean, some really good dialogue. We have a huge sports complex that had been an issue in terms of maintenance and employees. So whenever your local issues are, flush them out. That's what we did. Very public process. But you gotta give up some control. And we heard that earlier from Michelle. If people are going to make suggestions, you've got to listen to them. We went from January through May. And the thing with the task force, and it's one I've learned, short term, sunset dates, specific purpose, work with your commission. They'll ask you, well, who should I get? Well, I was new, I didn't know names, but I knew that I needed community activists and folks who had been critical of the budget and business people. The task force then, the chairman, who had been one of the worst critics in terms of the city's budget, came in and presented the recommendations, again with Thea and I. It didn't mean that we had accepted all of them. It didn't mean that the commission accepted all of them, but we turned the worst critic to the best supporter. Additional strategies, Marilyn's here. We joined the UCF Performance Benchmarking Consortium. Awesome. If you have not done benchmarking yet and you want to change your budget format, terrific. Very affordable option for all local governments. We did the early retirement incentive. How many of you guys have done that in your cities? Basically, we were lucky we had the reserves to do it. We spent about $780,000, but recurring savings of $451, and we're going into our 4th year of those savings. We amended our personnel policies, cutting back on some of the more generous benefits that we'd had, and now we've gotten the union to approve those changes too. We also expanded the budget information. It wasn't just that we put the budget on the website. We did the budgets in briefs. We did the issues paper. We had the entire task force, all of their information on there. We also did town hall meetings for commission districts because the mayor's elected at large, and we did them out in the churches basically, wherever we could find a hall big enough. And we advertised them a lot. And we said, this is your time. City department directors will be available. No podiums, no tables. You're out there. You've got a question on police, here's the police chief. You've got a question on fire, here's the fire chief. So we made it a very public effort. We also asked questions. Very, very important. We had small groups, go into your group. I use city staff a lot to facilitate the small groups. It worked great. We asked them, these are in your packet. You know, again, I think Michelle and Scott had mentioned, what are your priorities? How do you see these services as essential? And it was also a good time to get a check in terms of, are we heading in the right direction? All those results, again, went directly to the commission. Residents loved it. Good attendance at the beginning, although I will tell you about the 4th session, there were more staff than people. I think we wore them out a little bit, which is good. That's what you want to do. Again, well publicized, schedule out there. Our results, we had 3 years of union contracts, no impasse. Our union members, including police and fire, agreed to no salary increases, suspending longevity payments, suspending personal leave payouts. We've also just started working on pension reform, and I truly believe that this effort, we just received word this morning, our fire union has voted overwhelmingly to start contributing. They were contributing 1%. They're now going to start contributing up to 10% in fire pensions over the next 3 years. And we also rolled all the new employees back to 1999, which means we save our state premium taxes. We did it with no impasse because we started this effort 3 years ago. If any of you have ever read the old Harvard book, Getting to Yes, and looking at common interest when you do union negotiations, you got to think of the budget in the same way. There's always, and Michelle mentioned it, there's always a handle there that you can grab for folks. We also did permanent reductions in staff. I know a lot of you folks, you may say, well, the positions are frozen or we're just not funding them. We just gave it up. That's a lie. You know they're not coming back. We're never going to see the ad valorem dollars that we had at one time. So we just took the permanent reductions. Our general fund staff from 238 people to 170, 10 each basically in police and fire. We also reduced manpower on all of our fire vehicles. We're now running 2 per truck, which is a huge argument in a lot of communities. It was not in our community because we had taken it through the budget task force. You saw the permanent reduction Just in FY10 to FY13, when we started this process, we were close to 10 million in terms of tax dollars in general fund. We're living with 8 now. I will also tell you, we saw a 2% increase this year instead of the 0. Thea and I instantly have extra $45,000. Like, where do we spend it? Which is the other thing you've got to explain to people. It's only $45,000, folks. But the idea being that we've been able to move on from the general fund discussion, and we've finally gotten the commission to center in on stormwater. Of course, we had a stormwater fee in place, but they've not been willing the last 3 years to increase it, and they've already approved in a second reading an increase this year. And truly, this was our public hearing last September. 1 person. So it's 3 years of work, but it was definitely worth it. And light at the tunnel, these were the goals we put out for this fiscal year again. The balanced operating budget tied right back to the Commission's strategic goals. Every December, they set and do their strategic goals for us. Maintaining, they've got a 25% goal in the general fund of reserves. We've been able to maintain that. Reasonable millage rate. We're in a contest with Ormond Beach. They used to be second, now we're second. The Commission really loves their low millage rate. We're around 3.4. First salary increases this year coming up, and the transparent budget process. Thea has also put our accounts payable system now online. So anything that anyone would call up and ask you on budget and finance, it's online now. And I guess the message for you guys, and we love the train picture, you know, you can reach the light at the end of the tunnel, and it doesn't have to be the train. So any additional information, just email us, and thanks for asking, Scott. We enjoyed it.